right, guys, welcome back to another video on the channel. This is going to be a little different. Today, we're going to be doing a mock draft, but with a little bit of a twist. I'm going to be taking the odd picks, so 1, 3, 5, etc. And Colin's going to be taking 2, 4, 6, all the evens. And we're just going to keep going back and forth through this first round of the mock draft. So let's just get right into it. And first overall, I'm going to be the Panthers, so I'm going to take CJ Stroud. This is not going to be like a hyper realistic draft. We're just going to have fun with it. But I feel like the Panthers are going to take him no matter what. So I don't really want to change that aspect of it.
Yeah, and there's been buzz. There's always been buzz, but especially recently about Bryce Young going number one. Some people see him as that superstar, but I think we're both in agreement. Stroud is probably the way the Panthers are going to go. With that being said, I'm Houston at number 2. You got to take Bryce Young in this situation, so I will roll with that.
And then without any trades, I'm going to stick here, obviously, with the Cardinals, and I'm just going to take the best player available. I think Will Anderson is the best player in this draft. And if they stay and pick here at 3, I think you got to take him.
Yeah, I think that's a great pick. That puts me on the clock at 4. There's a lot of ways that the Colts can go with this. I'm starting to see buzz that Christian Gonzalez or, Witherspoon, a corner at 4 could be possible. But I think we've been mocking Anthony Richardson here for a while now. I think it's a good fit. So I will pick Anthony Richardson at 4.
Yeah, I mean, we both talk about how much we like Anthony Richardson, especially compared to Will Levis. And I guess with this video, we can go a little in depth about the picks, but these first few picks, not really much to say about them. But once we get later in the draft, it'll get more interesting. And then at 5, the Seahawks, I still think they take Jalen Carter at this spot. I think he's still one of the best players in the draft. I know he's probably going to slide a little bit, and depending on how we see teams trade up, he might slide down. But I think in this spot with Will Anderson going at 3, Seahawks got to take Jalen Carter.
Yeah, and we said on this mock draft we'd have a little bit of fun. At 6, I've pretty much given the Lions Christian Gonzalez for a long time now, but I want to explore a little something different. There's no trades in this mock that we're doing right now, and I really think if you can get an edge rusher on the other side of Hutch, you're going to have one of the best pass rushing duos for years to come. So I'm going to give the Lions Tyree Wilson right here.
Yeah, and I mean, in our last mock draft that we did on the channel, on the last episode, we talked about kind of the possibility of, especially a team like the Lions, having 2 picks in the first round. If there's a lot of quarterbacks that go in the first 4 picks, Gonzalez or Witherspoon might fall. So we could definitely see the Lions end up getting a cornerback later. But now we have the Raiders at 7, and I got to give them Will Levis. It seems like the Raiders really want Will Levis. That's their guy. I'm not a huge fan of him, but at 7, you got to take him.
Yeah. And right now I have Atlanta on the board. If Tyree Wilson was here, I think they would have gone with him. But with that being said, they have a lot of holes at defense. I'm a big AJ Terrell guy. I know you are too. But you still need more at corner. This is where I'm going to put my guy, my number 1 corner in this draft, Christian Gonzalez. I'm going to have him go to Atlanta.
And then now in an interesting spot, we have the Bears who traded down. And I think I've gone with a tackle. It depends on who they like the most. But in this spot, I kind of want to go a little different. And I want to beef up the D-line, and I want to give them Kalijah Kancey. I think he's a really good player in this draft. And I think they'll probably go with an offensive lineman. But since we're shaking it up a little bit, they definitely do need help on that D-line. And I think Kalijah Kancey is a very underrated player in this draft.
Yeah. So, I mean, with that being said, that throws, a kind of a big wrench in it. So when I have the Eagles on the board here, I might not have gone Kalijah Kancey, but now I have some options that I might not have been expecting. I'm considering going really crazy here, and I think I might just do it. So, I mean, this is a guy that we both like quite a bit, but, there's a variety of places you put him on the board. I was watching our guy Bengal talk in a video last night. This is his guy, and, watching some more film of him. He's not just any other running back. He's a generational running back. The Eagles brought in Rashad Penny this offseason, but he's not a running back 1 to me. I'm going to give Bijan Robinson to the Eagles right here.
It seems like we talk about it every single week. Bijan Robinson is one of the best players in this draft and definitely deserves to be top 10. But I mean, the way that teams look at running backs it's going to be hard for him to get up there. But I do think the Eagles, I mean, they've had some visits with him recently, so I could definitely see them taking him at that spot. And now 11, we have the Titans. They're in an interesting spot too, because they definitely need a wide receiver. But I'm going to lean towards offensive line here, and I'm going to give them Paris Johnson Jr.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when you look at the Titans' offensive line, they've lost some key pieces. Guy like Taylor Lewan's been there a long time. He's out the door. They really got to beef that up. And speaking of which, Houston is back on the board. I gave him Bryce Young earlier. I get him again. And I'm looking at my options. It would be enticing with Brandon Cooks leaving to get them a wide receiver like Johnston or Smith and Jigba. But I look at the board and, they have some vets on that O line, but they could really use an inside outside guy. I think we're going to go back to back tackles here. I'm going to give him Peter Skoronski.
Overall, good pick, and that hurts my Jets right now. At 13, they definitely need a tackle, and I don't know if I want to go 3 tackles in a row, so I might take this in a different spot. I'm going to give them Lucas Van Ness, which they do need a linebacker, and Van Ness is definitely more of an edge player. So I think that even with their need for tackle, I don't think they really need tackle, especially in this spot, just because there's so many good tackles on the board, especially in that second round. And I think Lucas Van Ness, especially in this class that is so talented at edge, is going to be a great player too. And he's definitely worthy of being a top 20, even top 15 pick. It just depends on how the board shakes up. And I'm going to give the Jets Lucas Van Ness here.
Yeah, and Banning gave me the courtesy of letting me pick for my Patriots at 14. And if we're being honest, I really want to go wide receiver here. I'm not the biggest Mac Jones supporter, but I would like to give him as many weapons as possible. With that being said, I don't think I can do that. We've been hearing a lot of buzz about a certain guy that fills a need for the Patriots, rising up a lot of draft boards. People are saying this is the best guy in his position group. I might not agree, but I think a guy like Belichick might. I'm going to give my Patriots Devon Witherspoon right here.
Definitely a good pick. The Patriots have had some interesting spots, especially at cornerback for the past few years. They've had a lot of guys kind of come in, obviously losing a very good player last offseason going to Los Angeles. Now the name is slipping me, JC Jackson. And they just need to beef up that cornerback spot. And I like that pick. And at 15 with the Packers, I usually think they're not going to draft a wide receiver, but we're just leaving them on the board at this point, and I don't think they can go past Quentin Johnston.
Yeah. And I mean, Quentin Johnston is definitely polarizing. Oh, I think we could see him go top 10, and I think we could see him go second round. He's one of those players that really depends who you talk to. I'm a fan of his. I know you are too. So I think that's a pretty good pick. With that being said, we like to mock Deontay Banks to the Commanders a lot. But one thing is in our mocks, usually we don't see Joey Porter Jr. here. I think the Commanders need corner pretty bad. I'm a big fan of Joey Porter Jr. I think pound for pound, he might be the best covered corner in this whole draft class. I think Washington would be ecstatic to see him here. So I will go with Joey Porter Jr.
And speaking of Pennsylvania, we got the Steelers here at 17, and they're in another interesting spot. They definitely need a lot, I would say, in this draft. Last year, interesting to look at, especially the comparison between last year's draft and this year's draft, especially at the quarterback position. Last year, the Steelers got the first quarterback on the board, and there was only 2 quarterbacks in the first 75 picks, which is going to be very different from this year when we're possibly seeing 5 quarterbacks, if not a lock at 4 quarterbacks in the first round. So very different. And this year, I'm going to stick with the offensive route for them. I know it's been buzzing that they might take a guy. I thought Joey Porter, if he fell, obviously they'll take him at this spot. Even a guy like Jordan Addison would be a good pick here. But I think they need tackle, and I'm going to take Broderick Jones here.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great pick. And, say what you will about the Lions offensive line, but if he was there, I think the Lions would have loved to see him too. He's just one of those guys that I really think can slide in anywhere. It's my favorite thing about Broderick Jones. So now the Lions are on the board. They need a couple of different things. I think losing Hawkinson has had me put a guy like Kincaid or Mayer here quite often, but I'm going to do something a little different. In my opinion, the Jeff Okudah experience has not worked out. I think, you are going to need to replace him. You can't pay him top tier corner money. I think you get the rookie contract of Deontay Banks here, and he fills a similar role.
And then another team that needs a lot of positions is the Bucks. I mean, if you look at this team on the depth chart, pretty much every single position on offense besides receiver that's decently strong for them, but quarterback, tight end, O-line, pretty much everywhere they could use someone, and on the defense too. But in this spot, I'm gonna go with who I think is the best tight end in the draft. I think Dalton Kincaid would be a good pick here for Baker Mayfield at quarterback, and we'll just have to see how well he plays there.
We're just gonna have to wait and see. With the Seahawks on the board, you gave him Jalen Carter earlier, and it puts me in a tough spot because I'm gonna do something that might not make a ton of sense with what's on the board, but I think it's right. There's some really good wide receivers still here. We see Addison, we see Smith and Jigba. I think they should double down in the trenches. I'm pretty confident in a guy like Nolan Smith. I know you're a fan of his. Him and Jalen Carter reuniting in the NFL in Seattle, I think would be a fun storyline. You get the dude to fill up the middle. You get Nolan Smith's insane speed off the edge. I think it will be a fun draft for the Seahawks, so I'm going to mock him there.
I like that. Nolan Smith, my favorite player in the draft, and love to see him go back with some Georgia talent. And at 21, got the Chargers here. I think every single mock, I'm pretty sure that I've done, I've given them a wide receiver, and they end up with Jackson Smith and Jigba here. So I'm going to go with that pick. Usually it seems like he doesn't fall this far to them. They would end up with a guy like Zay Flowers or Josh Downs, but I'm going to give them Jackson Smith and Jigba.
Yeah. And the Ravens are on the board. You mentioned Zay Flowers. I know Jordan Addison is here. We did our positional group rankings. Jordan Addison, I think, is a better receiver overall, but I really like the Zay Flowers fit. I think he's been underrated for a long time. Now he's finally being mocked in the right place. I think he fits well with the Ravens for whoever they stick at quarterback this year, whether it's Lamar or Huntley.
Yeah. And looking at this, the Vikings, I think, could definitely use a lot of players on defense, but I'm going to go more towards the offensive side. And I know we just talked about Jordan Addison still being on the board, and I'm a fan of him. But when it comes to receivers, it's definitely more of a team fit. So with that being said, I'm going to go with a Tennessee player in Hendon Hooker for the Vikings.
Hendon Hooker for the Vikings.
A bit
I'm
of
gonna go.
yeah, a
I'm
bit
gonna
of a
kick it back
shock
to you.
there.
I'm gonna kick it back to you. I want to hear more. I love it.
So I wanted to make it a little more suspenseful. I'm sure you probably were thinking Jalen Hyatt at that, but there's been some talk recently about it. Hendon Hooker has definitely risen up some draft boards. And the other day I talked about it on TikTok and I said that I think a good spot for him would be the Vikings, especially with a guy like Kirk Cousins there, just because Kirk Cousins definitely isn't the future guy for them. He's almost done with his career, I would say. I feel pretty confident in that. I think he's like what 33, mid 30s at this point, and he's not getting any better. Obviously, the stats might look really good with Justin Jefferson, but I think it would definitely benefit with a guy like Hendon Hooker who could sit for a year with the Vikings still being definitely in the competition, definitely a high playoff team. They could end up winning the division again. I know it'll be a little harder this year with the Lions getting better, but I do think this would be a very good spot for him. Can sit back a year behind Kirk Cousins and then come in next season with a guy like Justin Jefferson. And they could even go with another receiver in this draft too and bolster up that offense for him next season.
Yeah, and you know what's funny? If you guys don't know, I'm a big Tennessee fan, big Hendon Hooker guy. I really wanted to put him to the Ravens at 22, but I didn't know we were getting that crazy. I love it. I think it's a great fit. It's funny, Kirk Cousins is another guy who came in to the draft old out of Michigan State. He was about Hendon Hooker age. He actually had some injuries in college as well. So I think if, the Vikings like what they ended up getting with Kirk Cousins, I guess at the bare minimum, maybe you're getting young Kirk Cousins. Who knows? But maybe hopefully you're a little better than that.
Yeah,
With that being
hopefully.
hopefully we'll have to wait and see. With the Jaguars on the clock, I've been thinking about doing a lot of stuff. I feel like I want to switch it up, especially with Hooker being taken off the board. I want to do something crazy to rebut that. I think it would be very safe to give them Osiris Torrance or Brian Branch. I'm going to do neither of those things. I think they're going to need a tight end. They're not going to pay Evan Ingram after this year, but you have him for this year. The best tight end you could put next to him is not a guy like Michael Mayer. I don't want a receiver. I want a blocker. I want that 6 offensive lineman. You know where I'm going. I'm going to give the Jaguars Darnell Washington here.
Interesting that you say a blocker, because a lot of criticism on Darnell Washington is that he isn't a blocker. But I mean, watching his games, you can definitely mold him into a blocker. He's big enough to be a blocker. But I like the pick. I know there's some
Yeah,
people that would be upset about that, but I like the
well,
pick overall.
yeah, and to jump in, I just want to say I've heard the criticism that he can't block. I've heard the criticism that he doesn't do enough for his size. If he is a guy that's proven to me that he can work hard into the next level, I think you get him with the right coaching staff. I am confident. I know some Jaguars fans aren't going to be believers, and I completely understand. I really think he's going to make a good jump.
Yeah, and I mean, putting him next to Evan Ingram would be an electric tight end duo to watch. I mean, it would bring a lot of that Brock Bowers, especially from the Evan Ingram standpoint, both really, I guess, basically just receiving tight ends that can also essentially be a wide receiver.
Yeah.
And then at 25, I got the New York Giants here, and there's a lot of guys left on the board that I would like. And wide receiver has been a position. They've addressed it a little bit in the offseason, and Jordan Addison is here. But I kind of do like the idea of waiting till the next round. There's still probably going to be guys up there at that point, like Josh Downs, or even Jalen Hyatt. I wouldn't be mad at that pick, especially for the Giants. So I'm going to stay away from wide receiver at this point. They could use an interior lineman and a guy like Osiris Torrance, who I didn't really expect to be here at this point. They could use a linebacker too, but I'm just going to go with a guy that you could put next to Xavier McKinney in the safety position, especially losing safety in this offseason. I think Brian Branch and Xavier McKinney would probably be the most electric safety duo in the NFL at this point. I would love to see those two guys play next to each other.
No, and I love that pick because also Brian Branch provides some slot corner availability. And, the Giants have some guys there, but the fact that he could be one of those electric safeties next to McKinney, or he could roll down to the corner spot, I think that's a really good value pick right there. I have the Cowboys on the board. There's a lot of different directions we can go here. We talked about Michael Mayer looking like he could possibly be, a Jason Witten prototype type of guy. But I'm not going to lie, I just threw a tight end out there. And, the Cowboys love drafting best player available. I think there's a pretty good argument that would be Jordan Addison right now. You get another receiver next to some of your guys that you already have with Gallup and Lamb. I'm going to get Jordan Addison for the Cowboys here.
And up next, we got the Bills. And as we're looking at it right now, the only need on there is defensive back. They definitely need a lot more than that. This team is still good. They can still compete. But I think sometimes when you look at the board, especially later in the draft, you might see a position and a guy that you might not essentially need as much as another position. But I think you kind of just got to go best player available. And I think at this point, with a guy like Brian Brzee, he's a good player and he slid down boards, not because he got worse, but just because we see this every single year. More guys start to get more traction. I mean, even two guys that went at pick 23 and 24, Hendon Hooker and Darnell Washington. Before this whole draft season started, I would say both of those guys were probably a second round guy. But since position wise, that quarterback is such a need, and even tight end this year, tight end is so electric on the board, especially with receivers who are smaller. You might want a guy that's bigger. And I think a guy like Brian Brzee, like I said, has fallen down boards, but I think at 27, the Bills would be in a good position to take him here.
Yeah, I think it's a great pick. I'm a big supporter of Brian Brzee. He showcased a lot of what he can do last year in the college season, and he only fell off because of outside the field stuff that he couldn't control. When it comes to the player we know we're going to get in the NFL, he's going to be a stud. I think that's a great pick for Buffalo. With the Bengals on the board, I mean, there's a lot you could do here. It says that offensive tackle is still in need. I couldn't disagree more. They're already trying to move Jonah Williams because they're too crowded at the position. So I'm not going to go there. A position that's underrated that I think they really need is defensive back. I think you can probably already tell where I'm going to go if you've been watching the podcast for a while. Cam Smith has been my guy through this whole draft process. I know he's not the biggest guy on the field ever, but if I can be honest, you're not getting that from any of the corners this year, outside of maybe Joey Porter Jr. So I'm going to give him Cam Smith. I think he fits well, and I genuinely think he could end, his career as the best corner from this whole class.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked about it, and our position rankings will come out. A lot of people have him and Emmanuel Forbes kind of on that same level. I think Cam Smith's a little higher than him. I think they're both great players, but I do like the pick for the Bengals. And I agree. Obviously, they have an issue at O line, but they definitely address that and fix that this offseason. Whether all the players are really good, that doesn't really matter. Once you have bodies, you kind of figure out where people go on the offensive line. The NFL is not a league where if you're a left tackle, you stay left tackle your whole career. The way that especially the offensive lines have been recently in the NFL, guys get moved around until they kind of find their position. And on different teams, they can end up at different positions on the line, just depending on what they need. And talking about offensive line, the Saints at 29 here, I think they go interior offensive line. They do need it badly. And I'm going to give them Osiris Torrance. I think he's fallen in this draft. I think overall, I've mocked him a lot higher in this draft, even as high as 16 to the Commanders. And I think he's a great player and they could definitely use him.
Yeah, and now this gives me the Eagles on the board, and I guarantee you, Eagles fans are going to hate watching this. I've already made them upset with Bijan Robinson. They like Rashad Penny, they like Gainwell. I gave them Robinson, and I'm going to make them upset again. But I'm really trying to do what's in my best interest for them. You see a guy like Miles Murphy on the board, and I'm not super low on him. I actually do like him. I don't think that's the type of edge rusher that the Eagles need. You have Hassan Reddick who really balled out last year. I want to get a guy like that. He's clearly worked in the system. And this is a guy that I don't think we've ever talked about on the podcast that I'm a big fan of, and he's hanging around this spot all year. I'm going to give him Will McDonald. I think he's a threat off the edge. He really killed it at Iowa State. I know fans are going to be mad. I didn't give him Miles Murphy. I didn't give him Darnell Wright. But I really think Will McDonald is a guy that's worth spending a first rounder on.
Yeah, and I like Miles Murphy, but I think Will McDonald is a lot closer to him than people really talk about. And I like the pick overall. And for our last pick in the first round, the Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs, they're in a spot where it seems like every single year they just end up, obviously, they don't really need that much just because they are good each year. Even though if you look at the team depth chart wise, the defenses aren't always that great. Especially last season, the wide receiving core wasn't that great, besides obviously Travis Kelce. And they kind of lose receivers. Now they're just signing pretty much every wide receiver from the Giants. Obviously, they have Kadarius Toney and Richie James. So not a great receiving core. I know firsthand. And I do want to stay away from wide receivers saying that. I do think they could get a guy later in the draft. So I'm just going to go with a guy that we were just talking about, Miles Murphy. I think this would be a good pick for them. So I'm going to go with him to end the first round.
Yeah. And one thing I will say is I like Miles Murphy. I think he profiles better in a team like Kansas City than a team like Philly. Kansas City has proven with dudes like we saw young flashes of George Karlaftis. We've seen historical guys like Tom Bahali. These are big guys that play edge and really show out for Kansas City. So Miles Murphy, I know he's not maybe the tallest, but he is strong. He can play interior, and that's why him and Brazil work so well at Clemson. You get him with a guy like Chris Jones in the NFL, and it can be a whole new level. I think, as you mentioned, Kansas City always finds a way to pick well for themselves late in the first round. I think this will be another case of just that.
Yeah. And I mean, overall in this draft, like we said before, not hyper realistic. We did have some surprises in there, like Hendon Hooker. I do think that the more that we talk about the draft coming up, especially on the podcast, I do think Hendon Hooker might end up being in that spot for the Vikings, or potentially even in a spot like 20 at the Seahawks. I know people have been talking about the Seahawks taking him at 5. I don't think that's going to happen. I think 20 would be a better area for them, especially. So overall, I think this draft, it just kind of shows how different it will be if one guy falls that can change the whole entire draft. And I think that's why we're so excited to watch the draft this year, just because there's so many possibilities that it could go. A lot of years we see the top 5 picks pretty much locked in. This year, I mean, the top 2 picks are locked in, but after that, a team like the Cardinals, we have no idea what they're going to do.
I don't even think, I mean, we know who the first 2 guys off the board will be, but if you're telling me right now you're confident CJ Stroud is gonna be the first pick with no possibility of Bryce Young, I don't believe it, honestly. I mean, I think we both can acknowledge that the Panthers could go for Bryce Young, and that could really be it. And then, as we see, how do teams value Anthony Richardson? How do teams value Will Levis? I mean, is Will Levis more of a Trey Lance or more of a Mac Jones if we're talking in drafts past? Like, how high will he really go? So I'm on your side with this one. There's plenty of ways it could go, and I'm sure we made some fan bases mad. I'm sure we made some very happy, but overall, I mean, I don't think you can beat a mock like this. You just got to go back and forth, talk it out.
Yeah. So I know this is a little different pace from our usual podcast, but I think before the draft comes out, we might do another one of these videos and maybe not back and forth, but just a mock draft overall. We do talk about our mock drafts on the podcast, but if you guys want more of an in-depth mock draft, we would definitely do that. We talk about the mock drafts all the time, whether it's on the podcast or off the air. I think draft season is probably, I mean, for me at least, it's one of my favorite parts of any single sports season overall. And I think you can attest to that too. And if you guys enjoyed this, just let us know down below and we'll definitely do some more draft content. And with that being said, we'll see you guys in the next video.
See you guys.